Pigeonholes or possibilities? Life is full, isn't it, of pigeonholes or possibilities. Places where we can get narrow, where we can get stuck, or open-ended, expansive ideas and areas where we can create and unfold and develop. What are we called to be? When we don't ask that question, we can fall into a pattern of simply space. Simply space unfolding from moment to moment, filling our lives with unintentional tasks, unintentional actions, and even unintentional thoughts and emotions that lead and create from those thoughts, things that are unlike the picture that if we asked ourselves truly, what are we called to be, we may be demonstrating according to a higher pattern of law and not according to a random activity that is generated because of mindless actions, mindless thoughts, mindless even emotions. So what is our contribution as individuals to this collective environment? What is our contribution? What are we committed to? What are we called to be, and where do we start? And how often do we ask ourselves this question? Honestly, how often do we stop, step back, check in, and become conscious, mindful, and aware of the power in asking this question? We like that. That's what unity is all about, is asking those questions. It's not a spiritual practice for Sunday only, it's a spiritual practice for your life. And in fact, Sunday is simply the expression and the expansion of that consciousness and that practice. From a Martin Luther King talk that he did called What is Your Life Blueprint? He gave this talk to students graduating, and he says this. He said to them, doors are opening to each of you. Doors of opportunity are open to each of you that were not open to your mothers and your fathers. And the challenge facing you is to be ready to be entering these doors as they open. The challenge or the opportunity facing you is to be ready to walk into these doors as they open. I was at an ecumenical breakfast this last week where the topic was refugees in this area, in the Kansas City area. And it was beautiful to witness all of the spiritual communities coming together in service, and particularly the strength of the Christian community in this area in serving. Now, there are a lot of different philosophies, a lot of different ways of languaging our spiritual practice. The power in stepping forward into action and doing good is magnificent, and the love that is experienced and felt when that activity happens is universal, no? So I was floored by the beauty of the people around me and hearing about the work that they've done in our community, and also hearing from these leaders what their communities were doing, what the individuals were doing. Because no doubt today, people are waking up, aren't they, and stepping forward into service in greater ways. People are saying, I can no longer sit back and be a passenger on this life, or be a passenger in wanting things to happen. I need to activate it. I need to step into it. I need to stand for it, and I need to be the one. Yeah? The beauty of that awakening is that is what our practice in unity is all the time. Our practice internally is always saying, let life not happen to me, let it happen through me. Show me how it may happen as me. Because I am not separate from this God concept, this God idea, this God experience. It is in fact the absolute of love, the absolute of wisdom, the absolute of divine order. And it happens not just to me, it can happen to me, but that's a feeling. It happens in me, through me, and as me. So show me, how can I serve? Now, one of the leaders that was a former refugee himself, and in his language, he said it like this. He said, when you're loving each other, you're loving God. When you give to each other, you're giving to God. Similarly, when we take from each other, we're taking from God. And when we harm each other, we're harming God. In unity, we teach that God is the grand overall design, that God is love. How do we magnify and multiply that love? How do we add to it? And how do we acknowledge in the human condition that we can actually be a part of being separate from it, not in absolute truth, but in our activity? How can we close that down? We are standing in the midst of great potential in every moment. We live in a field of infinite possibilities. Are we adding to the chaos within our lives or within our world? Are we adding to the storm? Or are we the eye of the storm? And in fact, in truth, probably we're all both, right? We probably go back and forth between moments of kind of the sleeping condition, the ego condition, the lack awareness, our humanity, the dark night of the soul, the place where we're not engaging in our true being, we're not feeling it, and the place where we are grounded, we are centered, we are mindful, we are co-creating consciously. Collectively, we all have a carnal mind. Charles Fillmore, Unity's co-founder, called it the race consciousness when you bring it all together. That's the carnal mind of all beings, their human self, and we all have that on an individual level. But how do we open our divine potential? How do we go beyond that and let that lead our life and lead our collective creation? One of the steps and one of the ways, because we all have this, is to first acknowledge we have this side of ourselves. We all have a Nancy negative. We all have a poo-pooer. We all have a critic, complainer, a devil's advocate, a woe is me, and an Eeyore. Here we go again. Oh, here we go again. If one doesn't think they have that, we're all scared of you. In fact, a little terrified and praying for you. Praying for you that you wake up and see yours. Because the great danger is not in having one. It's not in having an Eeyore. It's not in having a Nancy negative. That's not the danger. The great danger is not knowing. In Unity, we're not about suppressing our humanity and just uplifting our divinity. We're about understanding, know thyself, knowing ourselves so deeply that we can consciously unplug and plug in to that which we want to expand. So the danger in not knowing ourselves is an error thought. It's an error thought, and when we create along with an error thought, we get just, nothing terrible, nothing awful, no hell that's outside that's going to come get you, no devil that's going to knock on your door or that is the reason you did it. It's just a moment to remember in mindfulness to wake up and become more conscious, to wake up and become more on purpose, to wake up and become more accountable. So the first step is to not make this side of ourselves a problem. Not make this side of ourselves a problem. When we do make it a problem, the result is almost always that we suppress it or we become blind to it. The result is almost always that we suppress it, then it gets twisted and acts out in many forms, or we become blind to it. The mind will want to entertain the futile, the temporal, the frivolous. We're here to steward the mind, not to be run by it. We are here, just like you wouldn't program a computer and say, just live my life without any input. We are here to learn this spiritual technology that is our being and to align it, to harmonize it with divine mind or the grand overall design, the highest idea of humanity as creation. That is what the master teacher taught. The master teacher taught that there is a divine blueprint. It is not just in me, it is in all of us, and we are here to understand this divine technology and to use it for the greatest good, to use it within our being and collectively to create accordingly, because there is in truth one man, one woman It is the Christed, the awakened, the anointed consciousness. And it is the spiritual goal and the spiritual birthright of all beings. And in fact, that seems to sound like a lot of work. It's what's there when you take everything else away. It's what's there when you stop trying so hard. It's what's there at the core and at the nature of every being. So in the next step, we become conscious. We become conscious of our human condition, and we become conscious of our unlimited nature. We're mindful and aware. And instead of ignoring, we become so very intimately familiar with these aspects of our consciousness. We begin to know them. And we begin to know ourselves. And you know what happens? When we begin to know ourselves so deeply and understand this framework, and it can happen either way, friends. It can happen by understanding someone outside of you, and that triggers it inside of you, or it can happen vice versa, in understanding yourself so much. And once you understand yourself so much, guess what happens? Judgment just drips away. Because you know so deeply how you ended up where you were. You begin to know yourself and know where you came from and what you're about so much. You begin to see things that are beyond what you would have available to you to see if you didn't do that spiritual work. And you begin to know that when someone shows up in this way, there is a whole bunch of thoughts, experiences, emotions, ideas, unmet needs, met needs, whatever it is, that came before that moment. And a graceful compassion comes over our beings. A compassion that is self-love, and a compassion that simply holds love and blesses the world around us, like a tuning fork. A compassion that knows that when we see any place within ourselves or within others, it is not anything but absolute love. And I'm talking not just this gentle, lovey. I'm talking a fierce power of love. In sacred scripture, this power is not always talked about gently. Like, you know, when you say fear in scripture, fear and awe are right there next to each other. So that kind of power, that kind of love can be received as going, ha! It can be something that scares people, because it's so clear, it's so strong. This is what we're about. This is the grand overall design. This is the light. This is wisdom. This is love. Stand in it. And it can also be thought of as awe. It can also be thought of as this graceful, beautiful experience, and experienced as, this is what it's about. This is what I am. This is what we are. And it can create such a soft gentleness, such a compassion, such a love for human nature and for our divine birthright that we soften. The next step in this awakening is to use that perception, that perspective, that awareness to activate our power, to use it, to consciously unplug our creative energy from anything unlike love. Unplug it. Anything that is frivolous, that is criticism, that is, all of those things, all of the minutia, all of the conversations that are of low vibration, to unplug from them and to plug into our spiritual power, to plug into our faculties of thought, emotion, and action, those life-giving faculties that source what we want to create. In Unity, we say there is the law of action, the law of mind action, that what we hold, we create, we draw to us. Well, it's not so simple as saying the words that we use. A lot of times that can be simplified to say, well, the words you use, and absolutely, the words we use have power. In Scripture, there was the Word, and the Word was God. Yes, but it is more than just a word. If it was just a word, we'd be demonstrating everything we say, and we'd all probably, ugh. But there is a way, to process that human condition and to process it in a way that you are so aware that this is just a small self, this is just a small ego self within that needs to get this stuff out, and you unplug your power from it and it becomes benign, not malignant. It is when it is powered by thought, emotion, and the whole energetic vibrational field that it expands. So when we take this, which we would like to create, and we choose consciously to plug it in, not just to the word, but to the word which truly is the emotional field, the thought field, the vibrational field, That is our creative faculty. And that faculty, friends, is greatly underused. It is greatly underutilized in our world. It takes a constant practice of unplugging from that which I don't want to multiply, the complaints and the conditions that keep me or someone else or the environment that I'm in or contribute to the collective energy of my community, my world, that keeps us limited. So let's ask ourselves today, what is it that I'm spending my creative energy on? Is there anything that I am spending this creative faculty on, my thought, my word, my emotion, that is unworthy of my time, that is unworthy of my spiritual power? One of my Unity friends said recently, fear in all its forms is a misuse of my imagination. Fear in all its forms is a misuse of my imagination. Isn't fear, worrying, and borrowing trouble in all of its forms a misuse of our imagination? Yeah. Now, how does that line up with conditions being unlike what we'd like to see? How does that line up with oppression and ideas? How does that line up with environments or things within ourselves that it's like we get it, that the grand overall design is so much more than this? We are missing the mark. Either within our being, within our communities, or within our world, we are missing the mark. How do we be in that space and still be in the consciousness of this clear power? Well, rather than wasting time borrowing trouble and fear and worry, we change conditions. If we're going to complain about something, contribute. Act. 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 That is the simple step within our being and within our world. If there is something we have a complaint about, act. But unplug the spiritual power from worrying, borrowing, trouble, etc., and step into mindful spiritual action on the outer and on the inner. In Scripture, it says, if you believe, you will receive whatever you ask for in prayer. Other versions of this are ask, and whatever you ask in prayer, you will receive if you have faith. Another version is, and all things, whatsoever ye shall ask in prayer, believing you shall receive. Believing you shall receive. So what is prayer? Prayer is often thought of as something that you just send out, a hope. But in Unity, we teach affirmative prayer. We teach that it is a conditioning of the mind. It is an opening and a conditioning of the mind. It is about making a firm agreement with divine law, with the true spiritual principles, with wisdom, with love, and with divine order. Prayer is a conditioning. It's a raising of the human condition into the spiritual condition. It's getting out of the unlimited and stepping into acknowledgement. Getting out of the limited and stepping into the acknowledgement of the unlimited, rather. And what is belief? So it says if we have prayer, we have belief, we have faith. Belief. This has less to do, I believe, with what we think it has to do with, and more to do, we think it has to do with what we believe, what we're thinking, but it really, our belief has to do with more about how we show up. How we show up. Michael Beckwith, the leader of the Agape Spiritual Center, who is one of the top New Thought leaders in the New Thought movement, he has said many times, if you want to know what you believe, look at what you're doing. If you want to know what you believe, look at what you're doing. We have these ideas of what we believe, but really what we believe is not an idea. It's a summary of how we're acting. It's a summary of how we're showing up. We may say we value our spiritual community, but if we're not contributing to it, if we're not sourcing it, we're just a consumer of it, we're not generating. Does that show that we believe in it, that we value it? No, we might be valuing a coffee shop down the street more than our spiritual community. If we say we believe in equality, and when we see things happening that don't line up with it, we are quiet, what does that say about our true belief. So are we willing to put our beliefs into motion? Are we looking at how we show up? Are we looking at where our time goes, where our talent goes, where our treasure goes? What are we sourcing through finance? What are we sourcing through our gifts? Where are we serving? And what do we believe? What does that show about what I believe about my presence on this planet? And what about our time? We may say we value family. We may say we value our spiritual practice. We may say we value the environment, whatever it is. But are we spending our time in those areas? Does how we spend that time line up with what we believe we value? So getting our actions to line up with our true beliefs is a spiritual practice. And it is a spiritual practice that when we become conscious of it, we can transform so much in our lives, so much of that part of us that goes, oh, things aren't going the way I want them to go. Woe is me. When we do a real inventory, we can see, wow, I'm not in alignment with what I thought I was. And the same thing happens with our words and what we contribute to a space within our own minds and among community. If we are lining up with thoughts of limitation and thoughts of lack versus being the eye of the storm, versus activating our practice, versus consciously co-creating, we are simply out of alignment with our highest intentions, no? It doesn't have to be a big, bad, scary thing. A folk singer, Robert Hake, said, "Every word you choose to say teaches the world to live that way." Every word you choose to say teaches the world to live that way. The last part of that scripture passage has to do with faith. Again, we can think faith is just hope. Faith is just like, give me the strength to believe what I can't really see is true. Let me hold something so clearly that I make it true. Let me know it so much that I make it true. A possible misunderstanding of faith. Charles Fillmore defined faith as the perceiving power of the mind linked with the ability to shape substance. The perceiving power of the mind that is linked with our ability to shape substance. So our mind can perceive something, and that is shaped with the ability to activate it, to make it come into fruition. That's different from hoping that if you think something, begging enough, it will come to you. This is an undertapped spiritual resource that is born into each of us and so often underutilized and misunderstood. It is a divine faculty, and it can be learned. It can be learned. And when we learn it, we use it as an application. When we understand it, it starts with our ability to perceive something, to get an idea of truth. See how it says the perceiving power? Getting so still that you perceive something. This is what artists talk about when they get an image of a painting to paint, a structure to develop in architecture, a poem to write, a math problem to solve, an intuition that led them or guided them to something they couldn't have known. This is that moment, that perceiving power, that moment where something's right off there like you're in a dream state and you think you might be able to catch it if you just get still enough or quiet enough. That's faith. It's opening up a space and asking for something and getting so quiet it's almost like Deepak Chopra says, eavesdropping on the mind of God. Eavesdropping on the mind of God. And when we get that, we don't have to have it listed out in goals. We don't have to know how we're going to get the resources. We don't have to understand even totally the idea that we're getting. We simply have to perceive it and link it through our power of will, link it with the ability to create substance. And that's linking it with our thoughts, our emotion, and this vibrational field. We all have this ability. We all have it. This is when we draw life into our creative center, into our brains, into our fields, into our spirit, and we link that with emotion. and commitment and activity, action, that brings it into fruition. It is the same faculty that people get when they are driven to accomplish something. This is the fabric of what we are when something is ready to be demonstrated in the material realm. We link it. When we get it, when we perceive it, we link it with our ability to shape substance. Eric Butterworth, one of the great unity teachers, says this. He says that you are vibration. You are vibration. He talks about a spiritual service and a coming together, a practice of coming together. And he says one of the benefits of attending a religious service in a church or a cathedral or a music hall over simply reading spiritual things out of a book is that a response is felt in the cells and functions of the body as a healing influence. When the vibration of the body temple is synchronized with powerfully spoken words of truth and the fine vibrations of the sanctuary and the collective expectations of the congregation, there is a transforming influence. Those who can get synchronized with the positive vibration, every service is a healing service. So I invite you to take a moment to close your eyes with me and follow with these words of Eric Butterworth. As we close our eyes, we take a deep breath in, and he says this: take a moment right now to get into the vibration of your own inner sanctuary. Be very still. Let your heart sing its song of joy as the cells of your body clap their hands in ecstasy. Your whole being is now synchronized with the rhythm of the universe. You are now ready to go forth into your world with the healing, harmonizing, and projecting vibration going before you to make safe, joyous, and successful your way. And let us bring those eyes into this collective field as we open our minds and our hearts. What are we committed to? What are we called to be? We are agents of change. Namaste.